Well, as you join us this morning, we are continuing a sermon series for the past year called Seeing the World Through a Biblical Lens. And we have taken important and very timely topics, and we have been tracing them throughout the Scriptures so that we might have a clarity of a worldview concerning many topics. We started our topic with our worldview of God, our worldview of mankind, mankind's sinfulness and need of salvation, the uniqueness and supremacy of the message of the gospel, what the Bible tells us about the environment and God's plan for this planet and its future. We talked about gender and marriage and masculinity and femininity and putting all those together into a biblical lens in which we can view the circumstances and situations of our world. A worldview is just that. It's a way in which we make sense of the world in which we live. And you are in a culture and in a time that is giving you a lot of different worldviews through which to view this current climate in which we find ourselves. And they give you lots of different worldviews, and you can kind of pick and choose any worldview that you want and put it on, and nobody's going to criticize you because everybody's worldview is as good as anybody else's worldview. Well, there's a big problem with that, and we see how that is affecting our culture. And our desire has been to come and say, what does the Bible teach us about these things that we might, though we may not be very consistent in living these things, we clearly know what they are, and we are asking for God's guidance and direction, His strength and His wisdom to live out these things in a way that is very counter to the culture that we live in. We decided not to talk about politics. We really decided to talk about human government and look at what a historical look at human government, its role and responsibility. It seemed to me to be very clear looking at it historically that human government before the flood demonstrated to us that mankind left to his own devices was incapable of self-government. For we read at the time of Noah beginning to build the flood that it was really a time of unrestrained wickedness. There was nothing to keep mankind from doing all of the wicked things that his imagination could invent. And so God called Noah, and as Noah leaves the ark, the very first thing that God proposes to Noah is to help him and then society that would follow to understand that there was a role of humanity governing itself. And we saw that as an institution by God to protect and advance His image within the society. The way He was going to do that was by protecting what God has given to each individual in demanding that there would be a reckoning at the hand of fellow man by those who took it away. But mankind could govern themselves, and we could hold one another accountable. And God had given that accountability over to Noah and then society as a whole. The starting point in Genesis chapter 9 for protecting that which was sacred, that had the image of God upon it, was life itself. And those who took human life then would be held accountable for doing so because they weren't simply offending the human life, they were offending the very image and nature of God who had bestowed upon that human being their life. It's interesting that it had to do with image because when they start wondering about human government in Jesus' day, Jesus says, well, give me a coin, whose image is on it? It was an image issue. It was an image issue all the way back in Genesis chapter 9 that God had created man in His own image, and that was sacred, and nobody should be able to take that away from them. That didn't last long, though, because there was nothing other than just that. And so if we trace human government, and we can look back into some of the Mesopotamian era, we'll find that there were laws that began to be on the books, literally stone tablets before the Ten Commandments that really began to establish a retribution. If somebody does this, here's how you make retribution. And it wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't to reconcile people. It was to carry out retribution. The law comes along after the Exodus by way of Moses and being divinely given the Ten Commandments and the 600 laws after the Exodus, in that this isn't an eye for an eye vengeance. This is making restitution. You do something to somebody, this is how you pay them back. This is how you mend the relationship. It wasn't the Jewish system wasn't based on vengeance. It was based on reconciling myself to God, because I will offend him and my fellow man, and I need to then reconcile that to God. And so many of the Old Testament laws are in place for how do I reconcile my relationship to God every day when I don't follow his laws. And how do I reconcile myself to my fellow man? Because I'm going to offend them. I'm going to take what I ought not to take. I'm going to injure them. I'm going to harm one of their animals. I'm going to do something that's going to cause a difficulty. And the Jewish system wasn't set up for vengeance. It was set up for reconciliation. But the problem was that by the time we get to the book of the Judges, there was nothing to really put teeth to those laws. And so mankind chose independent liberty. I want to do what I want to do the way I want to do it, and no one has the right to tell me that I can't. Does that sound familiar? That's the dark ages of the Judges. For the writer of the Judges, who I think was Samuel, 4 times he says there was no king in Israel, so everyone did what was right in their own eyes. There was no one to enforce an authority over the law, so everybody just did whatever they wanted. Anarchy broke out in the nation of Israel for over 300 years. Because there was nothing that could really put teeth to the law. Everyone did whatever they wanted. I don't know if you go, boy, that seems like a lot of what's happening around here these days. So what do they decide? Anarchy can't go on forever. Samuel's about ready to die. He's the only one that's brought some teeth as a prophet to the law and had people accountable to that, and he's about ready to die, and his sons are immoral men. What are we going to do? We want a king, like everybody else. Let's be like everyone else, and we'll have somebody who fights our battles, takes care of us, does what we don't want to do. Let's invite a king in. And God says, okay, Samuel, let him have a king, but make sure you tell him everything that's going to happen. And God gives a laundry list. If you want a king, here's what you're going to get. And when it's all said and done, you'll cry out to me, because he will leave you in a desperate situation, and I will not listen to you. He's almost like parenting the nation of Israel. You ever done that to the kids? Okay, kids, if that's what you want, fine, but don't come crying to me. I mean, that's 1 Samuel. God literally says that to the nation of Israel. You want this? Fine, but don't come crying to me when it goes all sideways. But they do, and the nation never recovers. They will, for very few exceptions, they will have one tyrant king after another tyrant king until that tyrant king is taken over by a Greek tyrant king, who then is replaced by a Roman tyrant king, until we get into the New Testament and the end of the nation of Israel in 70 A.D. through another Roman tyrant king who just is tired of the Jewish people and comes in and invades Jerusalem in 70 A.D., and the nation has never been the same. Why? Because they wanted a king like everybody else who would do all these things for them, and they wouldn't have to take any personal responsibility for these things. And so, king, give us safety. King, protect us. Give us all the things we want, and we'll be your subjects. But God gives them full disclosure, and that's what they wind up with. When we get to the book of Luke, we discovered that Luke gives to us the role of government captured in 3 very important words. And why I think there's such very important words in Luke is because both Paul and Peter, when they start talking about human government in the New Testament, they will use one or sometimes multiple, 1 or 2 of these words as they discuss how the New Testament church is supposed to respond to human government. So Luke will introduce these 3 words, but Paul and Peter will expand upon them. The 3 words and here's the context. They want to arrest Jesus, and they want to take him to somebody who is the governor, which is the 3rd word, somebody who can take action against this guy. We can't seem to do anything about this Jesus of Nazareth. We need to take him to somebody who can. So they want somebody who has that ability to take action. That's the Roman governor. They also want somebody who has the power to do that, which is again the Roman governor, and they want somebody who is in the position, who has been given a position of power to take action. That's what the role of government is. We see it in Luke. We'll see it we'll see it explained in further detail as we get into the book of Romans and in the book of Peter's, which are coming up. So this is the role of government. It was a God-given opportunity for someone to be in a ruling position, to have power to rule and to make decisions. Paul will tell us why God has given mankind that kind of power, that kind of authority, but you'll have to come back in a couple of weeks. Last week we looked at the reach of government, because the question comes is, does the government have the right to reach into your personal life, mainly your pocketbook? Is it right to pay, is it lawful, they asked, to pay taxes to Caesar? Well, Jesus says, well, let me see the monetary system upon which Caesar is basing all of this on, and whosever image is on that, that's who you must recognize the authority of. And so the question was, do we obey God or Caesar? And Jesus is like, yes. Yes, you obey both. You render to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and you render to God what belongs to God. And so Jesus gives us this beginning glimpse, and his followers, his early followers, get a little glimpse that they're living between two worlds. Caesar's world, the world government, and God's world, God's system of government. We're living in the middle of both of these, but with one ultimate line of authority, which Jesus will now model for us in John 18 and 19. So if you would, please, turn in your Bibles with me to John 18 and 19 as we look at what our morning scripture reading was, but we'll expand a little bit on that in the next couple of minutes. Oh my goodness, how did it already become this late? Did somebody mess with the clock up here? Somebody put forward the clock, right? It can't be this late. All right. Are you ready to buckle up and hang on? Here we go. All right, John. Well, we read chapter 18, part of it with you. Remember, John records to us that Jesus is standing before Pilate. Pilate is examining him. Are you a king? They say you're the king of the Jews. Did somebody tell you this, or did you come up with this on your own? Pilate, he's like, am I a Jew? They've turned you over to me. Are you a king? For this reason I've come. For this reason I was born. And he says, he says in verse 37, then Pilate said to him, so you are a king? Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness of the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to me. Pilate says, what is truth? And leaves, and then continues his pursuit of trying to figure out, is this man guilty of something that I need to address, or is he innocent? He's wanting to try to figure out how to appease everybody and keep the peace at this very heightened time of the year. It's Pentecost, it's Passover. The city is swollen. There's all kinds of pressure upon him and the Jews, and so he's trying to walk carefully in this situation. So he proposes, maybe I can hand over somebody else instead of Jesus. So let's talk about this Barabbas guy. I'll offer Barabbas. And they'll want to keep Barabbas in prison and not let him go for the sake of Jesus. In verse 19, so Pilate then takes Jesus, he flogs him. The Romans who are there, the Roman soldiers that are there, then mock this idea that he's somehow a king by putting a crown of thorns on him and a purple robe on him, and they begin to hail him as the king of the Jews. These soldiers begin to strike him with their hands. Pilate then goes out in verse 4 and says, see, I bring him out to you that you may know that I find no fault in him. So Jesus came out wearing a crown of thorns, a purple robe. Pilate said to them, here, behold the man. Then the chief priests and the officers saw him. They cried out, crucify him, crucify him. And Pilate said to them, take him yourself and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him. The Jews answered him, we have a law, and according to that law he ought to die, because he has made himself the Son of God. Then Pilate heard this statement. He was even more afraid. He entered his headquarters again, and he said to Jesus, where are you from? Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, you will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority? There's our word that Luke used earlier? Don't you know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you? Jesus answered him, you have no authority over me at all unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, he did not deliver me. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater guilt. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, if you release him, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. So the text, we're going to move through this part quickly because I really want to get to the main point, because the main point sets us up for next week. So hang on until I get to the main point. We're going to go through these next couple of slides quick. Ready? So what we're going to see again, although Luke records it for us, we're going to see a glimpse of the fact that there are two kingdoms involved here. There is the kingdom of this world. It is the idea of something. The word world is the word cosmos. We get cosmetology, cosmetics. All of those words come from that. It has the idea of a purposeful, arranged order. Involves human wisdom, human government, human spirituality, which we know to be idolatry, our own human fallen nature. The world system takes all of that, weaves it together for the purposes of the God of this world to advance his purposes. So there's multiple kingdoms that we are operating in. One is the kingdom of this world. The God of this world is Satan, and he is arranging it, though it may seem chaotic. And we look at the world and we go, man, this is a bunch of chaos going on. There's anarchy everywhere. No, that's exactly planned. It's purposeful. It's a design. The God of this world is designing it for that. However, we also understand, and he will tell Pilate, there is a kingdom beyond this, a kingdom of the other world. God is the king. God is the God of that kingdom. He rules that world. The Bible tells us in Chronicles, yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty, for all that is in heaven and in the earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head above all. So there is this eternal kingdom that belongs to God, and he is accomplishing his purposes. But there is this other kingdom that's at work, and the God of this world is working that kingdom. And Jesus is revealing to Pilate that both of these are happening. And I am not the king as you might expect it. Yes, I am a king, but not a king like you think. From this kingdom, we recognize that God raises up rulers and puts them down. In speaking to Nebuchadnezzar, the greatest king of his time, God says to Nebuchadnezzar, I'm going to cause a mental illness to come into your life. I'm going to humble you because you, Nebuchadnezzar, still haven't got this. I am God, you're not. I am in control, you're not. And you will spend 7 years as an animal in the wilderness because you don't understand that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he wills. So Jesus is revealing we're living in multiple kingdoms. Jesus is presented in that as a different kind of king. He's going to rally his followers by his words and not by sword. His kingdom is going to be based on truth concerning him as the king. And then we recognize that in chapter 19, Pilate comes to him and says, don't you know I have authority to end your life or to give you your life? And Jesus says, I don't think you quite understand. You wouldn't have that authority unless a greater authority from above, has given it to you. So not only does Jesus reveal to us that we live in these dual kingdoms, we live in dual authority. There is authority that is from above. It is inherent in the person and nature of God. His authority reigns. If his authority is ever jeopardized, he is no longer God. It is inherent within the person and work of God, this position of authority, and all authority comes from him. Those in authority, oh man, I put too much in. I thought really I could get this done quicker. 2 authority realms. Jesus will also mention, I wanted to mention this because I know some of you are wondering about where is he going with all of this. Jesus says, the person who handed me over to you is really the one that's going to be judged more harshly. Remember that? So this is going to raise the question is then can people hold authority? If God is going to hold authority responsible, can the people of the government hold government accountable? We won't, because that'll be like an ultimate question at the end of this. Is like, what can we do to hold our government? Does the Bible at all give us an opportunity to hold authority accountable, or is authority beyond us? Well, if God can hold them accountable, is it possible? And we'll eventually get there in the next couple of weeks, because you see, Pilate was exercising his authority. He really had this authority, and he's ready to release Jesus for lack of evidence because he is inquiring about truth. Caiaphas was abusing his authority, and that's who hands Jesus over to Pilate. And so Jesus is saying Caiaphas is really going to be held more responsible. Why? Because he's not exercising his authority, he's abusing his authority. He is calling for the assassination of the Messiah. He's rejecting truth. And so we'll have to come back to this in a couple of weeks, because we really want to find out, do we have any say over the authority of the government? This is where I wanted to get to. Here we go. Jesus clearly sees kingdoms, power, and authority from a different perspective, does he not? Pilate doesn't see this perspective, and I don't even think Jesus' disciples see this perspective. Jesus has a unique perspective, and because those who are Christ's have the mind of Christ, we too can see these things. We can see kingdoms, powers, and authority from a different perspective because we have the mind of Christ and we have the word of Christ, but not from multiple lenses. You don't look at the earth's authority and then change your lens and look at the Bible's authority, and then take that lens off and then come over here and take another look. How many of you have a television that has picture in a picture? Dual screen. You know that advertisement years ago? Picture in a picture. Like you just possibly, you have to have both, because you can't possibly live. You cannot live only looking at one thing. You must watch sports and the news at the exact same time. You need picture in a picture. Remember that? I mean, how many? We probably went out and bought picture in a picture, because I just got to look at both at the same. I can't be thumbing back and forth from one program to another. I want to watch them both at the same time. How many of you bought? You don't have to raise your hand. Bought picture in a picture, right? That's the idea, not lens and lens. It's picture within a picture. It's a split screen. You say, what do you mean? We're going to view all of life, but it's going to really be clear when it comes to human government that we are going to look at these things within a picture within a picture. When we see those in authority in this world, we see them operating under the ultimate authority of God himself. God's frame is the master frame. It's your 72-inch TV. The kingdom of this world is what your old black and white looked like in 1962. It's that little frame, and it's fuzzy, and nobody really sees it clearly, but it's a picture within a master picture. They are incapable of going beyond that authority. That is, the little picture, the little one, can never go beyond the big picture. If it could, then the big picture, who is God, would cease to be God. The little picture is human government, human authority, human wisdom, human understanding, always operating as a picture within a picture. It is authority within authority, never beyond or above. But from the outside, it doesn't always look that way. Sometimes it looks like the little picture is running the big picture. Here's an example. We just read it in John chapter 19. Says this is when we start to think that the little picture is bigger than the big picture. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" I mean, we would have gone, "Stop! You don't have authority to do this. We need to stop this. This isn't what God would have planned. This is not right. We need to stop this. This is unjust. This is beyond the realm of your authority. Stop." Because we would see this as all of a sudden, somehow this has gotten bigger than God's perspective. The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So they delivered him over to them to be crucified him. So they took Jesus and led him away. And sometimes we can go, "Oh my goodness, the little picture is now bigger than the big picture." No, it's not. It's just you're still seeing it in the wrong perspective. This is the small screen within the ultimate screen, seen by the few who have eyes to see and hearts to understand. Peter himself was even confused like us, who tried to resist the authorities even to the point of wielding a ear-removing sword. Remember? Peter was going to stop this. I can't let that authority overtake Jesus. We need to stand up, pull out our swords, and he whacks off the chief priest's servant's ear. But even Peter begins to all of a sudden, at a certain point in his life, he begins to see this not as a little screen of human government, human wisdom, humanity overwhelming God. He continues to see it as in a different perspective, where human government, human wisdom, and that authority is always subservient to God's plans and purposes. And he gives that information to us in his very first message. I don't know if he was under time constraints, but this is what he said. "Men of Israel, hear these words." Acts chapter 2. "Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to by God with mighty works and wonders and signs that God did through him in your midst, as you yourself know." So there's the big picture. God, man, this is this big picture of this Jesus of Nazareth, did miracles and signs. You all know this, and he's laying out this 72-inch TV. But then watch him put the little picture in. Jesus delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge. He was delivered up. They didn't take him. They didn't capture him. He gave himself up. He did this because he wanted to. They weren't in control. He was always in control. He just gave himself up, which was actually right within the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. The definite plan and foreknowledge of God was fault-proof. Nobody could overshadow God's definite plan and foreknowledge. However, now he comes back to the little screen. You crucified and you killed by the hands of lawless men. That was all within God's plan, all within the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. God raised him up. Now he's back to the big picture. That you thought you had put the Son of Glory to death? No. God raised him up, loosening the pains of death, because it was impossible for him to be held by it. Let all in the house of Israel therefore know that for certain that God has made him both Lord and Christ. Little picture, this Jesus who you crucified. Peter is seeing this in a dual screen, never seeing the little screen in any way comes close to outshining God's ultimate purposes and plans. We would say that is unjust. There was no reason for that. All of that fulfilled God's perfect. The little screen we live with all the time, and sometimes we think somehow that's gotten beyond God. Like somehow, somehow Caesar, and I'm sure the New Testament Christians were thinking Caesar is beyond God. I mean, he's putting them to death. Caesar was the little screen. God was always the big screen. Adolf Hitler was always the little screen. God's was the big screen. Donald Trump was always the little screen. God's plans and purposes are always the big. Joe Biden is just the little screen. He would have no authority. nor would Bill Clinton or Donald Trump or any of the Bushes. They would have no authority. They've always been the little screen. We, God's people, cannot ever imagine in our minds and become shaken to the reality that God is working his purposes and plans exactly as he wants them. That's the big screen. That gives us hope. That gives us a future. That gives us the confidence to live in this world but be not of it, because we're constantly viewing things not with multiple lenses and becoming psychotic because we become inconsistent with crazy visions of what's going on in the world. We see it as a screen within a screen. God's purposes and plans always having preeminence. Peter is not toggling his camera between multiple lenses. He sees everything in split screen. He sees the affairs of this world, this kingdom, in a different frame of reference. The frame of God's world, God's plans, God's purposes, and God's kingdom being done on earth as it is in heaven. Now, Paul is going to take that two-kingdom split screen, those two realms of authority, a screen within a screen, and he's going to give us New Testament church doctrine on human government, its authority, its power, its governance, and most importantly, our response. How do we respond living in this dual screen world that really only people who are of Christ will have the mind of Christ to actually even realize that that's what's happening? You live in a world who has no idea that there are two kingdoms battling right now. Only those who have the mind of Christ, who understand these things as Peter and Paul, John, and Jesus understood. We are in the midst of two things that are in contrast with each other, but one will never outdo the other. One will never go beyond the other. And that's why you need to come back next week when we jump into Romans 13, when Paul now says, okay, Christians living in Rome, living in difficult times, living under not King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table with Guinevere, but Nero. How do you live under the authority of someone like that? Paul will make that clear to us as we get back together next Sunday and look at Romans chapter 13. Let's pray and let's take a little walk. Lord, thank you so much for your word. Guide us and direct us. Help us to see beyond our human eyes, to see with our spiritual eyes this world and all that's going on within it, that we might always understand, Lord, that you are God. You are in charge. These are your plans and your purposes to bring about your ultimate goals and to accomplish your ultimate purposes in this world and in our lives. Thank you so much for everyone who could be here this morning. May you have encouraged them and strengthened us. May you build our faith as a result of our time here together. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so here's the plan. We'd love for you all to stay, and we got room for you. We can all fit in there.